2024, Ukraine, February. Satellite images reveal something unbelievable. The Russian army is activating tanks from the 1940s, not as museum pieces, as combat vehicles, T-54 tanks. Developed in 1945, introduced in 1949, almost 80 years old. Why? Because Russia has lost nearly 3,000 tanks in Ukraine. As of July 2024, 1,913 destroyed, 530 captured, 289 abandoned, 155 damaged. The losses are so massive that modern stockpiles are exhausted, and these are documented losses. The actual numbers are likely higher. The T-72 series has suffered the heaviest losses, 1,216 units. That's more tanks than many NATO countries possess in total. Russia's pre-war stock of T-90s is depleted. Most of the T-80s too. Now T-72s are being pulled from storage, untouched for decades, and now T-54s, tanks from the Stalin era, tanks older than most of the Russian soldiers driving them. But here's the irony no one is talking about. These 100,000 T-54 and T-55 tanks, the most produced tanks in history, utilize German technology. Technology the Soviet Union stole in 1946. Technology from engineers whose names have been erased from history. Today, I'll tell you the true story, the story that's not in any textbook, the story of Operation Osoaviakhim, the story of 2,200 German engineers who were kidnapped in a single night, and the story of the technology that lives on in every Russian tank to this day, from 1949 to 2024. Let's start with the tank itself. T-54. Development began in late 1944. First prototype in February 1945. Series production from 1949, together with the improved T-55, between 96,500 and 100,000 units were produced. The exact number is debated, but one thing is certain. It is the most produced tank in history, more than the Sherman, more than the T-34, more than any other tank ever built. And it didn't just serve in the Soviet Union. Poland produced it under license. Czechoslovakia too. China built its own version, the Type 59. Over 50 countries used the T-54 and T-55, from the Arab-Israeli wars to Vietnam, from Africa to Asia, from Cuba to Korea, and now, once again, in Ukraine. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Egyptian and Syrian T-54s fought Israeli Centurions and Shermans. In Vietnam, T-54s of the North Vietnamese Army were engaged by American M48 Pattons. In Angola, Cuban T-54s fought South African Oliphants, all over the world. In every major conflict of the Cold War, the T-54 was there. But where did the technology come from? Let's look at the suspension. The T-34, the legendary Soviet tank of World War II, used Christie suspension, developed in the United States, purchased by the Soviets in the 1930s. The Christie suspension was revolutionary for its time. Large road wheels with internal springs. It allowed for high speeds over rough terrain. But it had a major drawback. The internal springs took up a lot of space in the hull, space that could have been used for armor or ammunition. The Germans solved this problem in 1942. The Panther, the best medium tank of World War II, developed in response to the T-34. Professor Ernst Lehr and the engineers at Henschel developed a dual torsion bar suspension. The torsion bars lay transversely under the hull floor. They didn't take up any internal space, and they allowed for a longer suspension travel than the Christie suspension. The result was superior. The Panther could travel at high speed over uneven terrain without shaking the crew. The precision when firing was significantly higher than with tanks using Christie suspension. The Tiger I used a similar system, developed by Henschel, with the famous disc brakes from Hermann Klaue, 55 centimeters in diameter on each drive shaft. The German tanks weren't just heavier armed and better armored, they also drove better, more precise, more stable, and the Soviets saw it in every battle, in every engagement, in every defeat. 1943. The Red Army captured the first Panthers at Kursk. Soviet engineers disassembled them down to the last screw. They analyzed every detail, and they recognized the superiority of the torsion bar suspension. In 1943, the Morozov Design Bureau began developing the T-54, a successor to the T-34, and it no longer used Christie suspension. It used torsion bars, just like the Panther, just like the Tiger, just like every modern German tank. Official Soviet historiography claims that the torsion bar suspension was an independent Soviet development, Soviet ingenuity, Soviet innovation, without Western assistance. But the timeline speaks against it. The facts speak against it. The technology speaks against it. Before Kursk, Christie suspension. After Kursk, torsion bar suspension. Coincidence? Hardly. That's no coincidence. That's technology transfer. Forced technology transfer. The T-44 became the basis for the T-54, and the T-54 became the basis for the T-55, T-62, T-72, T-80, and T-90. Every Russian tank since 1945 uses torsion bar suspension, every single one, without exception. But the suspension was just the beginning. 1946, October 22nd, at 3 o'clock in the morning, units of the MVD, the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Red Army began a coordinated operation in the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. The codename Operation Osoaviakhim. Osoaviakhim was not a Russian word, it was an acronym. Society for the Promotion of Defense, Aviation and Chemical Construction of the USSR. A paramilitary organization founded in 1927, but that was just the cover story. The real mission was robbery, human robbery. In the early morning hours of that day, 2,200 German scientists and engineers were taken from their beds, along with their families. Over 6,000 people in total, men, women, and children. The soldiers arrived with lists. They knew exactly who they wanted. Each name had been carefully selected. Rocket specialists, aeronautical engineers, radar experts, engine developers. It wasn't a random raid. It was a precise operation, planned for months, prepared down to the smallest detail. They had no choice. They weren't allowed to protest. They couldn't take anything except the bare necessities. 92 freight trains were waiting at train stations throughout the Soviet zone. Within 12 hours, they were all loaded, heading east, towards the Soviet Union. It was the largest organized abduction of skilled professionals in history. Who were these people? The breakdown is documented. 1,250 aviation specialists, 500 rocket experts, 350 radar specialists. The rest were spread across solid fuel propulsion, navigation, and other specializations. And among them were names that would shape Soviet technology for decades. Helmut Groettrup, an engineer at Peenemünde. He worked under Wernher von Braun on the V-2 rocket. After the operation, he led the development of Soviet rockets. Later, after returning to Germany in 1967, he invented the chip card, the basis of all modern credit cards. Brunolf Bade, aeronautical engineer. In the Soviet Union, he worked on bomber projects. Upon his return, he developed the Bade 152, the first German-built jet airliner. Ferdinand Brandner, an Austrian engine engineer. He played a central role in the development of the Kuznetsov NK-12 turboprop engine, the most powerful turboprop in the world. It still powers the Tupolev Tu-95 bombers today, Russia's strategic nuclear weapon carriers, and Hermann Klaue, the man whose story is almost forgotten. Klaue was an engineer at Argus Motoren in Berlin. He patented the disc brake in 1940, not for cars, for aircraft and tanks. Argus disc brakes were used in the Arado R-96 training aircraft. And in the Tiger I tank. Yes, the Tiger I had disc brakes, 55 centimeters in diameter on each drive shaft. Developed by Hermann Klaue, Klaue filed for approximately 800 patents during his lifetime, an inventor of extraordinary talent, but his name is almost unknown. What happened to him after the war? The documents are incomplete. Some of his later patents list an address in Montreux, Switzerland, but his years immediately after the war remain shrouded in mystery. What we do know: the Soviets were very interested in brake technology, and disc brakes only became standard in Soviet tanks after the war. Coincidence? Again, hardly. But back to Operation Osoaviakhim. The deportees were taken to various secret research facilities in the Soviet Union. They worked under guard. Their letters were censored. Their freedom of movement was restricted. Some stayed for 5 years, some 10, some longer. Some never returned. Working conditions were harsh. Russian winters, meager rations, constant surveillance. But the work was demanded, day and night. They developed Soviet rockets, aircraft, radar, and yes, tanks. They solved problems that Soviet engineers had failed to crack. They brought knowledge that saved decades of development, and then they were released, sent back to Germany, with instructions to remain silent about their work. Their names vanished from history. Soviet propaganda claimed all technology was their own invention, the brilliant Soviet engineer, the superior Soviet scientist. And the West was silent too, because the West had its own program, Operation Paperclip, Werner von Braun, the most famous case, but there were 1,000 others. American, British, and French intelligence agencies also scooped up German scientists. No one wanted to talk about it. The Germans, they were the losers. Their technology was war booty. Their engineers were disposable. No royalties, no recognition, no compensation. That's how the world worked after 1945. But let's look at the technical details. The T-54 was more than just torsion bar suspension. It was a synthesis of Soviet experience and German technology. The hull shape, low profile, sloped armor, concepts that the Panther tank had perfected. The turret mounting, a cast turret with rounded edges, designed to deflect projectiles similar to the Panther's turret design. The transmission, a 5-speed manual transmission with synchromesh. Synchromesh was a German invention. Before the war, Soviet tanks did not have synchronized transmissions. Drivers had to double clutch. After the war, they suddenly had synchronized transmissions. Where did the technology come from? From ZF Friedrichshafen, from Maybach, from the German companies that had developed tank transmissions. And the engineers who knew that technology, many of them were sitting in Soviet freight trains on October 22, 1946. Sergei Korolev, the future father of the Soviet space program, was involved in the operation as a technical advisor, with the rank of colonel. He knew exactly which German specialists were valuable, and he made sure they came east. Helmut Groettrup, for example. In Peenemünde, he was number 2 to von Braun. He knew every detail of the V-2 rocket. And he was willing to work for the Soviets, unlike von Braun, who surrendered to the Americans. Groettrup headed the Central Works in Bleicherode, a factory that included both former Mittelwerk facilities and new research institutes. Over 6,000 German employees. But on October 22nd, that was over. Groettrup and his best people were deported. In the Soviet Union, Groettrup worked on the R-1 rocket, an exact copy of the V-2, then on the R-2, an improved version with greater range. His work laid the foundation for the Soviet rocket program, for the R-7, the first intercontinental ballistic missile, for Sputnik, for Yuri Gagarin. But his name appears nowhere in Soviet space history. Only Korolev, the Soviet hero. Groettrup returned to Germany in 1953. He was never allowed to talk about his work in the Soviet Union. The Soviet authorities made it clear what would happen to him if he did. So he remained silent. He became a businessman, working for various companies. And then in 1967, he filed a patent that would change the world. The smart card, the integrated circuit on a plastic card, the foundation for credit cards, phone cards, SIM cards, ID cards. Yes, the smart card in your credit card, on your cell phone, in your passport. It all goes back to Helmut Groettrup, a man who developed Soviet rockets, who was abducted by the Soviets, whose name was erased from history, a man who developed Soviet rockets and then revolutionized modern payment technology, and no one knows his name. Ferdinand Brandner had a similar fate. As an Austrian citizen, he worked for Junkers during the war. After the war, he was taken to the Soviet Union. There, he developed the NK-12 turboprop engine, 19 million horsepower, the most powerful turboprop ever built. It powers the Tupolev Tu-95, the Soviet strategic bomber, which NATO called the Bear, that's still in service today. Brandner's engine, but his name erased. The Soviets credited Nikolai Kuznetsov with the invention. Brandner returned to Austria in 1954. He worked for various aviation companies, for BMW, for MAN. He helped develop European engines. He died in 1982, a man whose engine still carries Russian atomic bombs. The NK-12 remains the most powerful turboprop in the world. It flies not only in the Tu-95, but also in the Antonov An-22, the largest turboprop transport aircraft of all time. Brandner's legacy flies every day, in Russia, in Ukraine, everywhere. And no one remembers him. No one knows that an Austrian engineer developed the engine. Soviet historiography erased him, replaced him with Nikolai Kuznetsov. But back to the tanks. The T-54 entered service in 1949, 4 years after the end of the war, 3 years after Operation Osoaviakhim, and it was better than anything the Soviets had built before. The torsion bar suspension gave it excellent off-road capability. The low silhouette made it hard to hit. The 100mm cannon could penetrate any Western tank of the early post-war period. The West was shocked. American and British intelligence knew that the Soviets were working on new tanks, but they hadn't expected them to get so far, so fast. The answer came quickly. The M48 Patton in the US, the Centurion in Great Britain. But development took years. The Soviets had a head start, thanks to German technology, thanks to German engineers. 1956, Hungary. The popular uprising was crushed, and for the first time, the West saw T-54s in action. The analysts immediately recognized this was no primitive Soviet tank. This was a highly advanced combat vehicle, with technology that was equal to their own, in some aspects, even superior. How had the Soviets achieved this? The answer lay in the freight trains of October 1946, but no one wanted to talk about it. The T-54 became a bestseller. The Soviet Union supplied it to allies in the Warsaw Pact, to Arab states, to Asian countries, to African governments. It fought in Korea, in Vietnam, in all the Arab-Israeli wars, in Africa, in Asia, all over the world, in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Syrian T-55s fought Israeli Centurions on the Golan Heights. Thousands of tanks on both sides. One of the largest tank battles since World War II. In Vietnam, North Vietnamese T-54s broke through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon in 1975. An iconic image, the end of the Vietnam War. Captured by cameras. In Angola in 1988, Cuban T-55s fought in the Battle of Quito Cuanavale, one of the largest battles in Africa since El Alamein, and everywhere, it carried German technology into battle. In every engagement, in every war, on every continent, torsion bar suspension, synchronized gears, sloped armor, cast turret technology. The engineers who developed this technology had long been forgotten, but their work lived on. In 1959 came the T-55, an improved version with a stronger engine and better armor. It was produced in even larger numbers. Together with the T-54, at least 96,500 units were built. Some estimates go as high as 100,000. 100,000 tanks, all with German technology. And Germany got nothing for it. No royalties, no recognition, no compensation. The engineers who had been deported were sworn to secrecy upon their return. They were not allowed to talk about their work. Many did not. History was rewritten. The T-54 was a purely Soviet development, a triumph of Soviet engineering. And that is what it says in most history books to this day. But the technology doesn't lie. Look at the suspension of a T-54, then look at the suspension of a Panther. The similarity is obvious. Look at the transmission, the synchronization, the design principles, all German concepts. The Soviets did not invent it. They copied it, and they abducted the people who did invent it. 2024, Ukraine. History repeats itself. Russia has lost almost 3,000 tanks. The most modern models are used up, and now T-54s are being taken out of storage. Tanks that are 80 years old. Tanks that use German technology. The irony is bitter. Russia is fighting in Ukraine with tanks whose basic technology was developed by Germans, by engineers whom the Soviet Union abducted in 1946. And these tanks are being destroyed by Ukrainian Javelin missiles. Javelin, developed in the USA, with technology that also goes back to German inventions. Panzerfaust, 1943, the first effective infantry anti-tank launcher. The Americans studied it after the war. They further developed the bazooka, then the Law, then the AT-4, and then Javelin. German technology on both sides. The Ukrainians are also using Leopard 2 tanks, German tanks, with torsion bar suspension, the same technology as the T-54 tank. The circle is now complete. But just you wait. It gets even more ironic. These T-54s and T-55s that Russia's deploying now, they're not being used as regular battle tanks. They're simply too old for that, too vulnerable. Instead, they're being used as mobile artillery, firing from hidden positions indirectly, like howitzers, and some are even being used as suicide weapons. Russian soldiers are loading them up with explosives, remote detonation, and sending them toward Ukrainian positions. 80-year-old tanks, powered by German technology, used as rolling bombs. The engineers of Operation Osoaviakhim could never have imagined this. But it clearly shows one thing. The technology was solid. Those tanks still work after 80 years, just not as battle tanks anymore. Time has just passed them by. Drones, javelins, NLAWs, modern anti-tank weaponry, FPV drones that can destroy $1 million tank for just $500. The T-54 was built for a different era, an era where tanks were the kings of the battlefield, where infantry hid from tanks, not the other way around. That era is over. In Ukraine in 2024, infantry are hunting tanks with drones. The roles are reversed, but the basic principles remain. Torsion bar suspension still provides the best off-road capability. German engineering from 1942 still works, but the technology that made it possible lives on. In every T-72, in every T-90, in every modern Russian tank, torsion bar suspension, a German invention, and no one is paying for it. Let me sum it up. 1942, German engineers developed torsion bar suspension for the Panther tank, Professor Ernst Lehr and the Henschel team. 1943, the Red Army captures Panthers at Kursk. Soviet engineers analyze the technology. 1943, the Morozov Design Bureau begins work on the T-54 with torsion bar suspension. 1945, first T-54 prototype. 1946, Operation Osoaviakhim, October 22nd. 2,200 German engineers are abducted, 6,000 people in total. 1949, T-54 goes into mass production. 1959, T-55 follows until 1981. Production of the T-55 ends. At least 96,500 units produced. 2024, Russia reactivates T-54s for the Ukraine war. 80 years, the same technology, the same torsion bars, the same German concepts, and Germany has never received a cent for it. The engineers of Operation Osoaviakhim are dead, their names forgotten, their stories untold. Helmut Groettrup died in 1981 in Munich. His wife wrote a book about their time in the Soviet Union, but it went largely unnoticed. Ferdinand Brandner died in 1982 in Vienna. His NK-12 engine still flies today. Hermann Klaue died in 2001 in Switzerland. His 800 patents are almost forgotten, and the 2,200 others, the nameless engineers, technicians and scientists, the rocket builders and radar technicians, the aircraft designers and engine developers, vanished into history. Their families often don't even know what they worked on in the Soviet Union. The documents are still classified, the archives still locked. Some never returned. Some died in the Soviet Union from illness, from exhaustion, from a broken heart, far from home, forgotten by the world. Their graves are unmarked, their names unknown, their stories untold. Their work lives on in Russian tanks, in Russian rockets, in Russian airplanes, but their names are erased. That is the true story of Operation Osoaviakhim, not just a deportation, a systematic erasure. The Soviet Union didn't just take the people, it took their identity, their history, their accomplishments, and the West helped through silence, through forgetting, through rewriting history, because everyone had their own German scientists, because nobody wanted to draw attention to the moral problems. Paperclip in America, Osoaviakhim in the Soviet Union, Alsos in France, similar programs in Great Britain, two sides of the same coin, or better, four sides, five sides. Every victor took what they wanted. Wernher von Braun became an American hero. He sent Americans to the moon. He was celebrated, honored, admired. The 2,200 engineers of Osoaviakhim, forgotten, erased, their work attributed to Soviet scientists, their names removed from the documents. That was the difference. The Americans made propaganda out of their German scientists. The Soviets hid them. But today, 80 years later, It's time to tell the truth. The truth about hundreds of thousands of tanks, the truth about German technology, the truth about forgotten engineers. If you appreciate these connections, if you want to understand how German engineering has shaped the world, then support this channel. The super thanks button below this video allows me to continue researching, to continue documenting, to continue showing the truth that's missing from official history books. Every contribution helps. Every share spreads the knowledge. Now it's your turn. Did you know about Operation Osoaviakhim? Did you know that Russian tanks use German technology? Write your thoughts in the comments. Discuss with other viewers. Share this video with people who should know the truth. And if you want to learn more about the hidden German roots of modern technology, subscribe to this channel, activate the bell, become part of a community that knows the true history. The super thanks button below this video allows me to continue researching, to continue documenting, to continue telling the forgotten stories. Every contribution helps. Every share spreads the knowledge. Every comment shows the algorithm that these stories are important. The next revelation is coming soon. We will honor more forgotten engineers, uncover more stolen technologies, correct more history. Until then, goodbye, and never forget. Hundreds of thousands of tanks, German technology, forgotten engineers. Isn't it ironic that even in 2024, we're still seeing echoes of German ingenuity on the battlefields of Ukraine? The Russian army still employs T-54 tanks, veritable museum pieces in their combat vehicle lineup. These tanks, relics from the Stalin era, were in no small part built upon technology, obtained, let's say, indirectly from Germany. Think about it. Decades after the Soviet Union and its Red Army conducted Operation Osoaviakhim, a clandestine effort to seize German technological secrets after World War II, that technology is still influencing modern warfare. It's a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it? That the USSR, and now Russia, owes a debt of technological advancement to the very nation they fought so vehemently. It's a legacy of forgotten engineers whose brilliance, whether acknowledged or not, continues to shape history.